All right. Well, that's some good stuff, man. That is some really good stuff. We're excited for Ellery. We're so grateful for David and Darcy and the whole family. Thankful for the family that was able to come and be a part of this. It's great to celebrate life change. It's why we exist as a church. We exist so people can experience Jesus, grow together, and make a difference. And so this is just a really cool piece this morning. So welcome. My name is Neal, and I'm the campus pastor here. If I haven't had a chance to meet you, I'm so glad that you're with us here on this. It's not beautiful. I don't want to say it's beautiful because I don't like it, but it's on this great day to worship together. So, I don't know if you've experienced this before or not, but when you get older, your mind thinks that you can do things that you don't necessarily. You can't necessarily do anymore. You know what I'm talking about? So there's this thing called being a weekend warrior. Have you ever heard of this term before? It's kind of like, you work during the week, and then you still, after the weekend, you go to the weekend and you go play full court basketball, you go play tackle football, you do all these things, and as if you were still young, but you're not. And so I remember this is something that happened to me. We moved here from Pennsylvania 6 years ago, and my brother-in-law ran an upward basketball program. He was like, hey, we're at our church up in Fairfield, Ohio. He's like, hey, we're getting everybody together, and all the coaches are going to play full court basketball. And I'm like, oh, yeah, sure, I would love to be a part of that. I played basketball in high school. Yeah, that sounds good. And so I went there, and it's funny how you are on the court and your mind says that you're an 18-year-old, and that while you're on the court, you don't really feel like it's any different from when you're 18 and all that kind of stuff, and everything's happening as it's supposed to. And then the minute the game is over and you sit down, the mind has said you're an 18-year-old. The body has told you you're a 50-year-old, all right? And that's just the way it was for me. And I remember there was a specific time during the game, there was this guy that's like 3 times my weight, which really isn't even that big of a guy. And I just remember him, he just boxed me out, and his butt went into my ribs. And I was like, oh, that doesn't feel right. And then I got home, and literally I'm laying on our bed. I'm like, Jesus, come take me, because I can't move. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be able to breathe in a few minutes. This is just a difficult moment in my life. And so I just remember that specifically and thinking to myself, oh, so this is really painful. The pain in that moment is kind of a teacher, a reminder that you are not what you once were. And it's an indication to you about something that should or should not be taking place in your life. And if you've had that happen to you, some of you don't play basketball and some of you don't play, tackle football anymore, but maybe for some of you, this is just simply going out and shoveling snow. You get 5 or 6 inches of snow out there, and you go attack the snow like you did when you were 21 years old, only now you're 40, or now you're 45, or now you're 50, or now you're 60, and you suddenly realize at the end of this that you're in a significant amount of pain. And so when you walk in and you're walking around and your body is so stiff, it's like a steel beam in a sub-zero freezer. Your leg won't move, your hip won't move, whatever it is, and you're in a lot of pain. There are sometimes people who are well-meaning that talk to you, and they're a little bit like Job's friends in the book of Job. They mean well, right? But it doesn't always come across. And they say something like this to you in that moment. They say this: pain is your friend. It reminds you that you did something you shouldn't have, and you probably shouldn't run it back, right? They say something along those lines, and they think they're being really nice to you, but they're really just shoveling more dirt on top of your grave. And so as you realize that that's not something you can do. But there is a great truth in that illustration, one that the scriptures teach quite often, that pain and suffering happen, and they happen for reasons. And so this morning I want to kind of talk a little bit about that. Now, there are a number of reasons that the scriptures gives us in terms of why pain could be in our lives. One of those reasons is simply that the world is a broken place. And because the world is broken, because of sin, it contains pain and suffering that all of us will endure. And so in this reason, it's not because of something that we have necessarily done wrong as much as it is simply that we are living in a broken world. And because we're living in a broken, flawed, messed up world, all of us are going to encounter pain and suffering. If you go all the way back to the book of Genesis, at the beginning, there were two individuals that God created that were sinless, Adam and Eve. And Adam and Eve were the only individuals that were sinless, and they sinned, and then, of course, sin and death entered into the world, and this broken world became what it is. But if you go back and look at what God says about work prior to when Adam and Eve sinned, it was actually a good thing. Most of us kind of look at work as being like, this is this necessary evil, and it's a burden, it's a toil, and it's pain and suffering from the moment you clock in to the moment you clock out. But like, that's not the way it always was. It wasn't always that way. And so sin introduced that pain and that toil into the world. And so we now live in this world that is broken. So that could be a reason that you're going through pain and suffering. Another reason that you could be going through pain and suffering is that Satan and his forces are doing something that is bringing pain and suffering into your life. So you should know this. Satan and his forces don't like it when people are moving toward God, when people are seeking to follow God with their lives. And as you make movements toward God to obey and to pursue him with your life, Satan and his forces will try to put roadblocks in your path. They'll put pain and suffering to kind of keep you from pursuing Jesus and pursuing God. You think about this guy Job that I mentioned earlier. If you're reading through the Bible in a year chronologically, Job is where you just finished up. And you're probably really thankful you finished up from there. It's a little depressing. But here's a guy who did nothing wrong necessarily, but he was a faithful follower of God, and that meant he was a target of Satan and Satan's forces. And so I just want to say, if you're seeking to pursue God with your life and you're trying to be faithful to him, that you might occasionally experience pain and suffering from Satan and his forces trying to prevent you from following God. If you're not interested in following God this morning, if you're just like, I'm saved, but I'm not really interested in, really pursuing God with my life, Satan will probably leave you alone. But that's not actually a good place for you to be in either. So, third reason why you may have pain and suffering in your life. Someone does something, and we get caught in the waves of the consequences. And so this someone may be someone who is in close physical proximity to you, or maybe close relationally to you, but they do something, they sin, they screw up, they make a mistake, and as a result of that, you experience pain and suffering. A simple illustration of this is if a drunk driver hits another driver, and that driver who was hit then has to go spend days in the hospital and months in rehab, it wasn't that driver did anything wrong, it was that there was another driver that did something, and they have got caught up in the waves of the consequences of their actions. And so we can experience pain that way as well. Another reason that we could experience pain is that we are simply in a period of time in our lives where we are growing spiritually, are growing in a number of different ways, and there's pain that gets associated with that. And this is almost a good kind of pain. We go to the gym sometimes, you build muscle, or you're a runner and you're trying to kind of get a longer distance and running in kind of focus. You're training for a marathon or something like that. And you're going to undergo a lot of pain in that process, but that's a good kind of pain because you're growing your muscles, you're growing your ability and your capacity to run and all those types of things. And so there's growth in that moment. So that can be a good kind of pain. And then there's one more category, one more reason why we could be experiencing pain. And that is that we do something wrong and we experience the pain that comes from it. Like we do something in our lives that is not healthy or productive spiritually, and we experience the consequences of those actions, which include pain and suffering. And so I could point to an example in the scriptures. the most famous king of Israel. His name was David. And David decided that he wanted to do something with another woman that wasn't his wife. And he just decided he was going to make it happen. And so he ended up doing it with her, compelling her to do it. And then he actually killed off her husband in the process. And the pain and the suffering that he experienced and the pain and suffering that his family experienced for generations down the road all resulted from something that he did wrong. And so in our text for this morning, we actually have a group of people that are in the final category. They have decided to run as far and fast away from God as possible. They are in absolute and utter rebellion against Him. They are bringing on the pain that they are experiencing because of what they are doing. But I want us to see, even in this last category, even in their pain and suffering, God was using it in the life of the Israelites to get their attention and to help them want to turn to Him from what they are doing. He wants them to come to Him, and in this way, pain and suffering can actually be a gift. And that's what I would say is the kind of the teaching point from this morning's text, that pain and suffering can be a gift when God uses it to connect us with Him and experience life-changing grace and forgiveness. In other words, what we're going to see this morning is that initially, as bad as pain and suffering can be for us, when we experience Jesus, we experience a good that we've never experienced before. And so if you have a Bible, I'd love for you to turn to Amos chapter 4. We're going to be looking at that chapter as we continue our series called Amos, Justice and Faithfulness. And if you're newer to church, just to kind of give you a sense of kind of how we're doing this here, is that we sang 3 songs up front. This is a way that we can worship the Lord. And then now we're actually going to take a little bit of time and open up the Bible and then explain what it says and kind of how it applies to our lives. And then we're going to sing one more time at the end, and we'll be finished for this morning. Now, in the text, Amos gives us 4 specific thoughts to help us understand that pain and suffering can be a gift. The first of those 4 thoughts is found in verses 1 to 3, and here's the thought. Privilege in life isn't always privilege in life. Like, privilege isn't always privilege. Notice with me verse 1. Hear this word, you cows of Bashan on Mount Samaria, you women who oppress the poor and crush the needy, and say to your husbands, bring us some drinks. There's an old adage that I heard a lot when I was a student, and it was this: with privilege comes responsibility. And you may have heard that as well. The idea that the privilege that we have, the wealth that we have, the opportunities that we have been given, we are to be responsible with the things that we have been given. In verse 1, we meet a group of people who have been given a tremendous privilege, but are in fact squandering it and using it for ways that are not pleasing to the Lord. Now, the text actually starts out, it says, hear this word, you cows of Bashan. And it's referring to women. I want to encourage all the men in the room, and please do not use this terminology with women. It's going to be really helpful for you if you choose not to go that direction, okay? But the term here is specifically a term that's meant to help us see the privilege that they had. The cows of Bashan were in a rich area, wealthy. They were well-fed and cared for. And so what you need to see here is that Amos is telling these people, hey, look, you are in a place of wealth. You are in a place of prosperity. You are in a place of comfort. You've been given privilege, and you're not being responsible with it. He says specifically in the text that he uses 2 verbs. He says that you're oppressing the poor and that you're crushing the needy. And that you're saying to your husbands, bring us some drinks, that there's this self-centered, self-consumed nature to the way that you're using your privilege. And he's calling them out for that. He's saying, you're in straight up rebellion against me for what you're doing. Verse 2, the sovereign Lord has sworn by his holiness The time will surely come when you will be taken away with hooks, the last of you with fish hooks. Now again, in verse 1, he says, you've got the privilege, you've got the comfort, but know this, there's a time coming when you will not have that privilege and comfort. And so he's talking about the hooks, and specifically the fish hooks. And so those of you who fish know that you throw a line out there, and that usually has a hook on it, and there's usually some bait attached to that. The fish grabs it, and then what happens is the person fishing pulls that fish out of the water. The water is this place of comfort and privilege for that fish, and it gets thrown onto the land, and everything's all different now, and they're out of their comfort zone, and they're experiencing pain, and they're experiencing suffering in that process. And this is the idea here. He's saying, look, you've done wrong, and because you've done wrong, pain and suffering is on your horizon. Verse 3, he says, you will each go straight out through breaches in the wall, and you will be cast out toward Harmon, declares the Lord. And so he isolates their pain and their suffering. He says the privilege that you have isn't always privilege. Now, a second thought that he gives us is in verses 4 and 5, and he says this, worship isn't always worship. Just like privilege isn't always privilege, worship isn't always worship. Notice verses 4 and 5. He says, go to Bethel and sin. Go to Gilgal and sin yet more. Bring your sacrifices every morning, your tithes every 3 years. Burn leavened bread as a thank offering and brag about your free will offerings. Boast about them, you Israelites, for this is what you love to do, declares the Lord. He's saying that you all think you're worshiping, that you are doing something that's quote unquote worshipful, but your worship isn't really worship. Now, I mentioned this last week, and so it's probably good to mention this week as well. There's some context that will help this make more sense. The Israelites were supposed to worship in Jerusalem. At one point in time, Israel was a unified nation. But after Solomon, David's son, was king, there was a son that followed him, Rehoboam. The kingdom was then divided into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. So we have 10 tribes in the northern kingdom and 2 tribes in the southern kingdom. Jerusalem was in the southern kingdom. And so that's where they were to worship. But this thing happened where the northern kingdom didn't want their people to going down there. They were at odds with the southern kingdom, and so that just wasn't going to work. So they decided to build their own worship center without God's approval in Bethel. And so now we have this group of northern kingdom people worshiping in Bethel, something they were definitely not supposed to be doing. And they've set up this center, and they are quote unquote worshiping. But God says, hey, you're not really worshiping. He says that your worship, it's self-centered ritualism dressed up as if it were selfless submission to God. And this type of worship can fool others, and it can even fool yourself. You can even fool yourself into believing you're worshiping, but it doesn't fool God. And so he says, secondly, worship isn't always worship. A third thought that he gives us from verses 6 to 10, this fits with this idea that pain and suffering can actually at times be a gift. Suffering isn't always suffering. Suffering isn't always suffering. Verse 6 of Amos chapter 4, I gave you empty stomachs in every city and lack of bread in every town, yet you have not returned to me, declares the Lord. You're like, Neal, hold on a second. I don't know every Bible verse and all that kind of stuff, but what are you trying to tell me that God just said that he's essentially brought famine to people and that famine is actually a gift and that they shouldn't look at the suffering as suffering, but look at the suffering as a gift? And I'm saying, yes, that is exactly what they were supposed to be getting out of this. And he continues on in verse 7. He says, I also withheld rain from you when the harvest was still 3 months away. I sent rain on one town, but withheld it from another. One field has rain, another had none and dried up. People staggered from town to town for water, but did not get enough to drink. Yet you have not returned to me, declares the Lord. And this theme, by the way, you can see this in these verses. Yet you have not returned to me, declares the Lord. The pain, the suffering that they were enduring was a gift in the sense that it was God saying, come to me, come back to me. I found pain in many different things in my life. I'm really good at inflicting pain on myself, and unintentionally, right? So some of you are maybe gifted in this area too, and so you can relate. When I was younger, I put my hand on the top of a stove, only to realize that the stove was on, and you'd be it was very interesting how that worked. I put my hand on the stove, and then my brain said to my body, "You should not do that. Please take that off," right? And it only happened really faster than that, right? That's a way of pain. I managed. I was doing the dishes when I was young. This might come across like a bragging moment. I do actually do dishes. That's one of the things I do around the house. And I was washing this cup, and I wanted to get it really clean. I was pressing down as hard as I could, and then I just simply cracked and smashed the glass, and then I cut my hand. You can still see it on my hand, the scar from that instance. And so, and then when I try to chop up vegetables, occasionally I chop them up more than vegetables. You get like a finger in the mix. And so, I got different things. And so I do well at inflicting pain on myself. But God says, hey, look, just know this, that the pain that's going on in your life here is because of your rebellion, but I'm trying to get you to come back to me. There's a reason why I'm doing this. And so he continues on and continues that theme in verse 9. Many times I struck your gardens and your vineyards and destroyed them with blight and mildew. Locusts devoured your fig and olive trees, yet you have not returned to me, declares the Lord. I sent plagues among you as I did to Egypt. I killed your young men with the sword, along with your captured horses. I filled your nostrils with the stench of your camps, yet you have not returned to me, declares the Lord. So plagues and destruction, famine and drought, death, suffering, pain, were actually gifts in that moment to them to invite them to connect with God. And I know if you're newer to church and you're newer to the Bible, and you have this you can have this perception of God that he just crushes anybody who gets the slightest bit out of line, and that's who God is. But there's compassion in this. He's trying to get them to come back. He's trying to get them to say, "Here, this is a better way." And so he's using this purposeful suffering to give them clear guidance and direction on how to proceed. Now, there's one final thought that we see in verses 11 and 9, which is this: saving isn't always saving. Saving isn't always saving. Verse 11, he says, I overthrew some of you as I overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. You were like a burning stick snatched from the fire, yet you have not returned to me, declares the Lord. I grew up in a very small town in northeastern Pennsylvania. I'm super proud of it. I love it. The fact that we had no stoplights, and we had one little country store called Riverview Center, and that was essentially what I knew, and it was great. And we had about an acre or two of land, and our land was surrounded by fields of farmers. And so it just was, everything that you would possibly think of living in rural America. And my dad decided that what he would do is that he would put a burn barrel at the edge of our property, between our property and the fields. And so there was this line of longer grass. And so he put a burn barrel there. And so that as a kid, anytime you see fire, you are just attracted to it. And so that was the case for me as well. And so he would go out there and he would burn what would be our recyclables. And I would kind of stand there and watch in just utter amazement and fixated on the fire. And then I would get closer and closer, and my clothes would smell of the fire and its smoke and all that kind of stuff. And I loved every second of that. It'd be like, oh, I could smell that later. It'd be great. And as I got older, my dad started to start the fire, and then he would leave, and then he'd be like, hey, can you make sure that the whole county doesn't burn down and stuff like that? I'm like, oh yeah, sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to help you with that. So I would stand there and I would watch. And one of the things I would do is I would try to go around and find sticks in the yard, sticks in the long grass. and I would throw it into the fire, and then I would wait for the stick just to start to catch fire, and then I would pull it out, right? And you're like, why did you do that? You have to understand that boys, anywhere between 4th grade and 8th grade, the majority of the time we do stuff that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And if you think that you're going to figure that out, you just got another thing. It's going to be a bigger problem for you. Kids do stuff for no reason. That's what I'm saying. I did stuff for no reason. I have no idea why I did that. But I would throw that stick in, it would start to burn a little bit, and then I'd grab it and I'd put it and I'd throw it on the ground. And then once I threw it on the ground, I would at least wait for it to stop burning. And then I would pick it up. And I would think to myself, what's the structural integrity? Is it still good? Or has it just kind of cratered? And that was something that I would do. It was fun. You should come join me. I'll do it at my house after. It would be a great time. But I'm telling you, I would do that. And this is the interesting thing. In the text, God says, hey, look, you, Israel, you are a little bit like a stick that's been thrown into the fire, but that's been pulled out and kind of saved before it really lost its structural integrity. That you got a little bit of the burning of the flames, but you've been spared for the majority of it. This is me. I've done this for you. You've rebelled against me. I pulled you out of the fire. I've saved you. But the reality is, if you do not turn from your wicked ways, you will eventually be destroyed. That's what he says in verses 12 and 13 of the text. Therefore, this is what I will do to you, Israel. And because I will do this to you, Israel, prepare to meet your God. He who forms the mountains, who creates the wind, and who reveals his thoughts to mankind, who turns dawn to darkness and treads on the heights of the earth. The Lord God Almighty is his name. And so God has saved Israel in the past from dangers and destruction. But if they continue down this road of deliberate rebellion, in the end, that temporary saving is not actually going to be lasting saving. They responded to what God offered, that gift, and they chose to turn away from it. Well, let me give you 3 takeaways from the text this morning as it pertains to Amos chapter 4, and we'll be done. Number 1, I've saved this for a takeaway, and everybody has probably thought this, but I haven't articulated it. So I want to go ahead and articulate what is one of these thoughts. This is the first takeaway. Pain stinks. All right? Pain stinks. You're like, Neal, the whole time you've been talking about pain, you've been talking about God gives pain and suffering into our lives, but do you understand? Pain stinks. Suffering stinks. When my body hurts, it stinks. When I have relational conflict, it stinks. When all this stuff goes wrong in my life, it stinks. Yes, that is true. But God uses it. And so it's important for us when we are in the midst of pain and suffering to at least ask the questions of ourselves. What's the reason that I think I might be going through this? I was talking with somebody after the first service, and it's hard because each personality is a little bit different on this, and sometimes there's a good chance that if you're like, it's definitely not because I'm rebelling, that you actually maybe should consider that it could be because you're rebelling. But a lot of us have sensitive consciences, and we think every pain and every bit of pain and suffering that happens in our lives happens because we have somehow screwed up. And so to you, I would just simply say, offer a word of hey, there are a lot of things going on, and there's a pretty decent likelihood that it may not be because you're deliberately rebelling. But you should at least pursue what's going on in your life. What could be happening? Is it just that I live in a broken world? Is it because I'm kind of caught in the consequences and the waves of someone else's sin? Or is it something that I'm doing? Is God trying to grow me? What could be happening at this moment? And ask yourselves the question. Pain stinks even more if you're not actually getting the most out of it. So I'm not asking you to rejoice over it. I'm just simply saying, ask yourself what's happening. Use it wisely in your life. Second, and this kind of feeds into what I just said, pain can have a purpose. And so I think that's so crucial for us to wrap our hands around. And even if you're at the point in your life where you, Neal, I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, right now, I am running as far and fast away from God in a certain area of my life, and I need to change. And you know that. Pain is serving a purpose for you of helping you turn from your self-centeredness, turn from your current way so that you will actually turn back to God. And that's a good thing. It's serving a specific purpose. God is a God who redeems all pain and suffering. Even if you didn't cause it, even if it's something that's just a part of being in a fallen and broken world, God can redeem it for good. Pain can have its purpose. And so I want to encourage you to really lean into that truth. Third, pain reminds us that following Jesus is better. Pain reminds us that following Jesus is better. I have managed to pursue a lot of things in my life. Even as a follower, even when I put my faith and trust in Jesus, I've managed to try to pursue a bunch of things in my life. And every time I got to the end of that, I realized Jesus was better. There's never not a time where I have walked away going, Jesus isn't as good. He is always better. Following Jesus is always better. And pain is a reminder of that. That Jesus is always better. And I would say that some of you are in the throes of it this morning. You have success by the world's standards. You have privilege by the world's standards. You have all these things, and you're experiencing pain and suffering, and you're feeling like life is absolutely empty. And there's a reason for that. It's because you haven't met the ultimate purpose for life, which is Jesus. You don't know that there's another category of life full of forgiveness and grace because of Jesus, and you're just living in this lower tier, this lower area of life. C.S. Lewis has a quote about this, but I'm going to butcher it. But he says something along the lines of the fact that a lot of us live our lives just playing in mud, not even realizing that there is something far greater than that that's available to us. And that is so true. Pain is a little bit of a reminder that there is something far greater than what we might currently be pursuing. And the way that we can connect with God is to understand what Jesus has done for us and to put our faith and trust in Him. The New Testament tells us that Jesus came to this earth. He lived a sinless life. He died on the cross in our place for our sins. He's taken all of our sins, past, present, and future, put it on Himself, died on that cross, and then He was buried and He rose from the dead. And when He rose from the dead, He showed us that He is stronger and more powerful and that He defeated sin and death. And that you and I can have hope, and we can have forgiveness, and we can have a totally different way of living life by putting our faith and trust in Him instead of putting our faith and trust of ourselves and wondering, are we good enough today? Did we do enough right? Did we give enough? Were we kind enough? Were we do all this stuff? The answer to that question is we all fall short. That's what Romans 3:23 says, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. But Ephesians 2:8-9 says, for by grace are you saved through faith, and it not of yourselves, the gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast. That there's a gift. Just like pain's a gift, Jesus is a gift. The pain of the gift of pain can lead to the gift of Jesus, and that can totally transform your life. And so I'll encourage you, if you have questions about this or you have doubts about where you are in this process, Mike and I would love to have a conversation with you. We can tell you exactly how you can put your faith and trust in Jesus right here, right now, at this moment. We can also walk you through, if you're still kind of working through objections, we'd love to walk with you through that journey as well. But don't leave the pain and the suffering there and act as if there's nothing to be gained from it. There's a lot that can be gained from that as well. Well, I don't know if you're a weekend warrior. I don't know if I'll see you out playing full court basketball or playing tackle football or out there shoveling your driveway. But when you get done with any of those things and your body reminds you of your age, I want that to be a reminder of the fact that pain and suffering can be a gift when God is using it to help you connect with Him. Let's pray.